Tonight at 10, the President of the United States arrives in the UK for a major summit of world leaders this weekend. Arriving tonight on Air Force One, this is Joe Biden's first overseas trip as president. Tomorrow he meets Boris Johnson to discuss, amongst other things, the UK's trade row with the EU.
There's a big agenda and big ambition here. The opening act in what could be a momentous few days, the first face-to-face meeting between the Prime Minister and the most powerful man in the Western world.
And this is Cornwall's Carbis Bay, near St Ives, where the G7 summit is being held, a village now surrounded by a ring of steel and thousands of police.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, this is a quiet residential area with a school at the top, you know.
Joe Biden is now on his way to Cornwall. He's expected to arrive in the next hour. Also on the programme tonight, the UK records its highest daily COVID cases since February as the Prime Minister sounds downbeat over the prospect of lifting England's restrictions in 12 days' time. A row between the Sussexes and a Buckingham Palace source over the naming of their new baby daughter, now a warning from Harry and Meghan's lawyers. And getting ready for the Euros, which are about to kick off a whole year late, with England, Wales and Scotland all in action.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel.
Good evening. The President of the United States has arrived in the UK ahead of a meeting with world leaders at the G7 summit this weekend. Joe Biden's first overseas trip as president begins tomorrow with a meeting with Boris Johnson, at which he's expected to say that the trade row between the EU and the UK should not be allowed to endanger peace in Northern Ireland. At the heart of that row is the Brexit agreement's Northern Ireland Protocol, which allows for border checks on goods going into the province from the rest of the UK. Ministers want those checks to end, arguing that they are leading to food shortages. Our North America editor, John Sopel, has this report.
For the first time since becoming president in January, Joe Biden steps out from Air Force One onto foreign soil. The soil of Suffolk and RAF Mildenhall, to be precise, on a perfect summer's evening. The president wants this first foreign trip that will take him to Cornwall, Brussels and Geneva to be seen as a decisive break from the Trump years. America no longer isolationist. Points he drove home to US servicemen and women at the base once he told them to relax.
Please, at ease. I keep forgetting I'm president.
America is back in a role of global leadership, he told them.
At every point along the way, we're going to make it clear that the United States is back and democracies of the world are standing together to tackle the toughest challenges and the issues that matter most to our future. That we're committed to leading with strength, defending our values, and delivering for our people.
Whether it be COVID, the global economy or climate change, Joe Biden wants to see America at the forefront. And he looked ahead to the trickiest of his encounters on this trip, his meeting in Geneva with the Russian president.
I'm heading to the G7, then to the NATO ministerial, and then to meet with Mr. Putin to let him know what I want him to know.
One domestic issue where Joe Biden can be expected to weigh in is on Northern Ireland, where the US is watching with some unease British attempts to amend or renegotiate the Northern Ireland Protocol that puts a de facto border for trade between mainland Britain and the province. The US says the achievements of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement that played such a decisive role in bringing peace to Northern Ireland mustn't be put in jeopardy.
Whatever way they find to proceed must, at its core, fundamentally protect the gains of the Good Friday Agreement and not imperil that. And that is the message that President Biden will send when he's in Cornwall.
And if he had any indication that it would imperil the Good Friday Agreement, would that jeopardize a future US-UK trade deal?
I don't want to sit here today and negotiate in public around linkage or make some claim or threat. I would just say that our concern runs very deep on the Northern Ireland issue.
For G7 leaders, there'll be relief to see a more familiar style of American president. Less isolationist, more supportive of international bodies, less capricious. But there's unease too about how reliable a partner the US will be in the long term, how much longer the US can be seen as the preeminent superpower. Joe Biden's got his work cut out. John Sopel, BBC News.
Well, the European Commission has warned that the EU is ready to take resolute action if the UK fails to meet its obligations under the Northern Ireland Protocol. But as he arrived in Cornwall ahead of the G7 conference, Boris Johnson said a resolution to the row was easily doable and it was important to protect trade flows between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, as well as on the island of Ireland. Our political editor Laura Kuhnsberg reports from Cornwall.
So is this just the beginning?
The beginning of what? The start of what could be a momentous week for this Prime Minister. To crank out deals with other democracies on climate, on COVID and cooperation.
I got it.
As world leaders make their way to Cornwall, he wants to be the host with the most.
Well, it's a big moment. Don't forget, this is the first time in 6 months in office almost that Joe Biden, the US president, has been able to come overseas for a major trip. It's his first time on the European continent. It's the first time any of us really have been able to see each other face to face since the pandemic began. And, you know, the pandemic, let's face it, was a pretty scratchy period.
So a tiny Cornish bay is being transformed into a stage for the world. Yet some of the nuts and bolts of the UK's friendship with its neighbours are already banged out of shape. While the Prime Minister was making his way to the southwest, in Westminster, this diplomatic spat with the EU was reaching new levels of danger.
The EU will not be shy in reacting swiftly, firmly and resolutely to ensure that the UK abides by its international law obligations. I was coming here with a hope for a breakthrough. Of course, now we have to consider our future steps. It's not too late. Let's correct the path. Let's focus on what unites us.
That tension's bound to be a topic of conversation here. This huge get-together is the first since the UK left the EU, and there's a heightened sense of hostility over how the Brexit deal's affecting Northern Ireland, just at the moment when Boris Johnson wants to be showing why friendship matters. Remember, under the deal, Northern Ireland has to follow some EU rules. So some goods are meant to be checked when they move from one coast to another. That created a trade border of sorts inside the United Kingdom, but it avoided the need for a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. Now time's passed, the UK's frustrated. It wants the EU to be flexible about the deal, but the EU's perplexed. They think the UK's not willing to do what it agreed. And the time allocated to business to get used to some of the change is about to run out. And there's a standoff because neither side appears willing to budge.
So the problem we've got is that the protocol is being implemented in a way which is causing disruption in Northern Ireland, and we had some pretty frank and honest discussions about that situation today. There weren't any breakthroughs, there aren't any breakdowns either, and we're going to carry on talking. What we really now need to do is very urgently find some solutions which support the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, support the peace process in Northern Ireland and allow things to return to normal.
Once the final preparations are complete, there is a big chance for the Prime Minister and for his colleagues from around the world to show they can pull together. But unscripted moments, unplanned for spats, could always spoil the show.
And Laura is in St Ives for us this evening. Could this trade row overshadow the start of the summit?
Well, Sophie, big opportunities like a summit like this also present big risks, and it's also always possible that a disagreement over that could explode into something that could overshadow some of the events. But look, Joe Biden and Boris Johnson have always been strangers at the table when it comes to Brexit, and Downing Street isn't going to be remotely surprised that he will tell the UK and the EU that it's about high time that they cracked on and sorted out their standoff over the agreement that was done over Northern Ireland. So it's not going to come as a surprise. Whether it makes any difference to the two sides being able to settle their differences is a different question. And don't forget, later in the week, Boris Johnson will, of course, also be speaking to leaders like Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, and some of those conversations could be quite tricky too. But look, Number 10's hope for this week runs much more broadly than any specific, although acute, problem like what's going on with the Northern Ireland hangover from the Brexit deal, if you like. Boris Johnson really sees this week as a chance to press refresh on the relationships between the world's biggest democracies. And initially, and perhaps most importantly, Number 10 believes that they have a willing partner in Joe Biden to get that done. And if you listen to the kind of language he was using tonight as he arrived on UK soil, well, I think it's fair to assume that he too sees this week as that kind of chance, really to show that democracies around the world, when they work together, can get things done. They don't just talk to each other, they don't just trade and exchange ideas, that actually, when they pull together, whether on the climate, whether on the COVID, whether on how the economy will recover after this extraordinary year, that rather than just communicating as individuals, as a team, they can actually get things done. That is the scale of Downing Street's ambition for the next few days. Whether the script goes according to plan, well, that's something that we're going to have to monitor. But Sophie, while these events sometimes, despite the razzmatazz, despite the souped-up security, end up feeling a bit like a talking shop, after the stresses and strains of this extraordinary year, it doesn't feel like this summit will be dismissed like that.
Laura Kunsberg, thank you. So the venue for the G7 summit is Carbis Bay, a small seaside village near St Ives. It's now surrounded by a ring of steel and thousands of police. John Kay has been talking to some of the people who live there who can't quite believe their eyes.
Cornwall. You know, that laid-back corner of the country where nothing much happens. St Ives doesn't have a police station, but there are now 6,000 officers here from across the UK.
They look like they're well prepared, and we're putting our lives in their hands.
From tomorrow, there will be less of a holiday vibe here. The two hotels where global leaders will discuss things like the pandemic and the environment are sealed off.
Some consider it a waste of money when we've got children going hungry.
Charles now looks out on a ring of steel.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, this is a quiet residential area with a school at the top, you know. A little bit unusual, you know.
What do you make of all this?
Well, it's just going to be so different, isn't it?
We're moving out of home for the weekend. We're moving away.
Cornwall's airborne predators now have some serious competition. There's a radar unit in the National Trust car park, and the fishing boats have company.
They just told me I couldn't go inside a certain area.
When this fisherman tried to reach his lobster pots this morning, he was turned back by a warship.
Were you not given warning about this? You didn't know?
None at all. No warning, nothing. We presumed the Navy would be coming for a bit of protection. I fully understand that they do need to do that, but they should have really given us a heads up.
But some are benefiting. These sisters are providing hampers of Cornish products for the VIPs.
For us, the prospect of one of our items ending up in somewhere like the White House is actually mind-blowing, and we can't quite get our head around it. You know, we're in a small shop in St Ives, so for us, this is kind of the biggest thing that could happen for us.
Spencer just wants to know how he's going to get his car out. He's turned up from Scotland on holiday, expecting a sea view, not a summit.
We didn't know till we arrived.
What? You didn't know it was happening?
No.
What do you make of it?
Some do worry about COVID and protests. But next door to the summit, there is pride that Cornwall's big moment is here.
Well, tonight, as the first international delegations arrive here in Carbis Bay, we've seen roads being closed and lots of police sniffer dogs out. There's a real sense of something big is about to happen here. People can't quite believe this sight. You know, that the parish church in this village now surrounded by security barriers. Now, there are 4 different protest zones that have been created in other parts of the southwest, well away from the summit venue itself, and the police are hoping that protesters will go to those sites instead of coming here. But they say they are prepared for the eventuality, given the profile of this, that lots of people might well intend to get here. So for the politicians just down the hill in their meeting rooms, and for the people around here in their homes, it promises to be a tense few days. Sophie.
John, thank you. The number of people booking a coronavirus vaccine hit a record daily high yesterday as the system was opened up to people aged between 25 and 29 in England. More than 1 million appointments for first and second doses were booked. It comes as cases continue to rise. More than 7,500 new infections were recorded across the UK in the past 24 hours, the highest daily number since the end of February. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes reports from Manchester.
This is what we're likely to see in hotspot areas of Greater Manchester and Lancashire in the coming weeks. In Bolton, a big push on testing but also vaccinations has succeeded in cutting the infection rate by around a quarter in just 10 days. The plan is to replicate that success across the region. Here in Stockport, in the south of Greater Manchester, the infection rate has grown by 150% in just a week. Now, that's obviously meant some school children have been sent home, even some businesses have had to close as staff self-isolate. But the really serious impact will be if those infections translate into hospitalisations, if people fall so ill they end up being admitted. So far, at least, health leaders in Greater Manchester say the vaccines are keeping the most vulnerable out of hospital.
It is now predominantly younger people who've not had access to vaccines. They're not getting seriously ill and they're not, in general, ending up in intensive care.
Because it's generally unvaccinated younger people falling ill with the virus, there have been calls for surge vaccinations in areas seeing a spike in infections. But the supply of Pfizer and Moderna, the vaccines used for the under-40s, is limited. So surging in one region may not be possible without causing shortages in another. The good news is that around 8 in 10 adults in the UK now have coronavirus antibodies through vaccination or past infection. The figures are 83% for adults in Wales, 80% in both England and Northern Ireland, and slightly lower, 73% in Scotland. But there are still many unknowns, with fresh warnings the Delta variant, now dominant in the UK, could be 60% more transmissible than the Alpha or Kent variant.
We're not out of the woods yet. I think we really need to prioritise getting more vaccines into more people, so that we can deal not only with this variant but with the risks of opening up and continue to move forward and not take a step back.
And all of this will play into the government's decision on whether restrictions in England are eased on June the 21st. That will have a real impact on lives and livelihoods for those like Doug Almond, who just wants to see his small chain of family-run pubs in Stockport back to full capacity.
It's the first thing you think about when you're waking up. Are we going back to full strength or not? It really is. If you've got to put the decision back, we understand. But what we really don't want is the ambiguity where stop and start, stop and start.
But today, the Prime Minister said there were arguments being made for both pressing ahead and delaying the unlocking.
What we need to assess is the extent to which the vaccine rollout, which has been phenomenal, has built up enough protection in the population in order for us to go ahead to the next stage.
Getting life back to normal while keeping us all safe. This is a decision that is in the balance. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Stockport.
Well, the latest official COVID figures show that in the past 24 hours, 6 deaths were reported and there have been 7,540 new infections, which means an average of 5,984 new cases per day in the last week. Nearly 137,000 people received a first dose of the vaccine in the latest 24-hour period, meaning more than 40.7 million people have now had their first jab. That's over 77% of the UK adults. More than 313,000 have had their second jab in the past 24 hours, meaning more than 28.5 million have had both doses. So over 54% of UK adults are now fully vaccinated. Well, our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, joins me now. And the Prime Minister was certainly sounding more downbeat today about lifting restrictions.
Yes, just a week ago, Sophie, Boris Johnson said he could see nothing in the data
that suggested we couldn't go ahead with the final lifting of restrictions on the 21st. Perhaps notable, he didn't say that today, but instead did mention the rise in cases and in hospitalisations in some areas. And some are interpreting this as a hint that the lifting might be delayed, perhaps by a few weeks to coincide with the school holidays starting in mid-July. So what in the data has changed? Well, it's all about the rise of the Delta variant. Professor Neil Ferguson, one of the most influential scientists modelling the outbreak, said today there's still lots we don't know about this variant. It could be between 40 and 80% more transmissible than the Alpha or Kent variant. And scientists, he said, needed a few more weeks to work out how bad any third wave might be. Now, we know that if you're fully immunised, you have strong protection against serious COVID infection, and only a tiny proportion of those being admitted to hospital have had both doses. So delaying unlocking by a few weeks would allow millions more to be double jabbed. But for businesses, theatres, for anyone planning a big wedding or wanting their freedoms back, well, any delay would be a bitter blow.
Fergus, thank you. The Old Bailey has heard that a 19-year-old man accused of killing two sisters in Wembley had promised to sacrifice women in order to win the lottery. Daniel Hussein is on trial for the murders of Nicole Smallman and Biba Henry in a park a year ago. He denies the murder charges. June Kelly has more.
Last weekend, Mina Smallman and her family had to face the first anniversary of the deaths of her two daughters. Today they came to the Old Bailey to see a teenager go on trial accused of killing them both. Biba Henry on the left died within hours of celebrating her 46th birthday outside in a park during lockdown. Her younger sister, Nicole Smallman, who was 27, was murdered beside her. Their bodies were discovered with their limbs intertwined at Friant Country Park in Wembley in North London. In the dock is 19-year-old Daniel Hussein. He denies the double murder. Prosecutor Oliver Glasgow QC told the jury he'd made a written pact with the devil, signed in his own blood. It said he would perform a minimum of 6 sacrifices every 6 months. Sacrifice only women. Build a temple for you to do everything that I have promised. For me, win the Mega Millions super jackpot.
The court heard that Daniel Hussein's DNA was found on both women's bodies and on a blood-stained knife close by. Biba Henry had been stabbed 8 times. Nicole Smallman had suffered 28 stab wounds, and it appeared she had tried to fight off the attacker. June Kelly, BBC News at the Old Bailey.
The High Court has ruled that the government acted unlawfully when it gave a contract worth more than £500,000 to a company run by friends of Dominic Cummings, who was Boris Johnson's chief advisor at the time. Ministers have denied favouritism was shown towards the market research firm Public First, but the court found there was a real danger observers might assume bias because no other companies were considered for the work. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning is at the High Court, and what does the ruling then mean?
Well, is it as Labour puts that this is contracts for mates, or as government sources suggest that they just didn't get round to filing the right paperwork because they were dealing with a COVID crisis? Well, the judge here at the High Court had the final say. She said that the government did act unlawfully when they were giving this contract to Public First. The company that was run by friends of Dominic Cummings, they had also worked with Michael Gove, although Cabinet Office officials say Mr Gove wasn't involved in the decision, but his name was over all those legal papers. It is embarrassing for the government because the judge agreed with the campaign group, the Good Law Project, that there was this sense of apparent bias, that they should have looked at other companies before awarding this £500,000 contract. Mr Cummings has been tweeting about it today. He says that in effect the judgment is saying, well, you should have been filling out forms to compare other companies rather than dealing with the COVID crisis. Public First says it's proud of the role it played to try and help the country during COVID, and the Cabinet Office said the judge didn't find any actual bias and that it has tightened its procedures. But there are more of these judgments due for the government, especially on PPE contracts, and they might be uncomfortable as well.
Lucy, thank you. New figures show that young people around the world have been hit particularly hard by the impact of the pandemic. Globally, 1 in 6 of the under 25s were unemployed at the end of 2020, double the rate for those over 25. In addition, 1 billion young people have missed out on education and training. Here's Darshini David.
What's missing from the skies above Crawley are planes from neighbouring Gatwick. On the ground, that's meant thousands of job losses, blowing careers off course.
I started an apprenticeship for business admin level 2. Due to COVID, a month later, my contract was terminated.
In July, I just thought I'm going to get made redundant anyway, because that's when they said that they were just making redundancies. So I went looking for a job myself.
I was fortunate enough to obviously have been made redundant, but then found something almost straight away, so I'm very thankful for that.
They're completing business admin apprenticeships, but face uncertainty over what's next. Unemployment has tripled in Crawley.
We've still got some pain to come with the unwinding of the furlough scheme. It is going to affect more young people. There will be more young people, sadly, falling out of employment over the next 6 months or so.
Youth unemployment has risen particularly sharply in Crawley. Across the country, 1 in 7 young people are now out of a job. It's even worse in some popular summer spots. Cadiz in southern Spain should be a 3-hour hop from Gatwick, but there's currently no direct flights. The blow to tourism comes as the shipbuilding and aviation industries also struggle. Engineering graduate Carmen is finishing an apprenticeship in naval architecture, but she may not even secure bar work.
Here in Cadiz, most of my friends are really frustrated. The only jobs that they are required for are internships. So most of them are angry and frustrated because they have been working already, they have a bit of experience, and they are still required to be paid less.
Globally, over 1 billion under-25s have had their education, employment or training interrupted. But the battle so far has prioritised protecting the physical health of the elderly and vulnerable.
The brunt of this is being borne by young people to some extent, because they are the ones who need those early opportunities. So it's in the interest of not widening inequality in society as a whole that more of an effort is made.
What are the risks if those who can make a difference, policymakers, businesses, ignore that kind of advice?
We're throwing away the potential of 1.8 billion young people.
These women hope their work will pay off, but disruption at the start of careers can blight fortunes for decades to come. And there's no silver bullet. Darshini David, BBC News.
There's a different version of events tonight from a Buckingham Palace source and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex over the naming of their newborn daughter Lilibet. It comes after a Buckingham Palace source told the BBC that the Queen was never asked by Prince Harry and Meghan for permission to use her childhood nickname. But now the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have issued a legal warning to some reporters covering the story. Well, our royal correspondent Johnny Diamond is here with me now, and 2 sides and 2 versions of this story.
2 very different versions, Sophie, and both of them centring around this issue of the naming of their newborn child, Lilibet. Lilibet, of course, was the nickname of the Queen when she was a child. It was the name given to her by George V. It's a name her close relatives used. It's very personal to her. And after Harry and Meghan made the announcement that they were going to call their little girl Lilibet, stories started to emerge, sourced to friends of Prince Harry, that he had gained the permission of the Queen to use the name. No, he did not, a palace source told the BBC. She was never asked for her permission. Well, the Sussexes shot back. A spokeswoman for Harry said that he had brought this up early with the Queen. He'd specifically mentioned the issue of Lilibet, and that had she not been supportive, they would not have used the name. At the same time, as you mentioned, Harry and Meghan have instructed their lawyers to send out letters to various different national news outlets saying that what the palace source told the BBC was false and defamatory, and that the news outlets should not repeat the allegations.
Johnny, thank you. Meanwhile, the Queen has been presented with a rose on the eve of what would have been Prince Philip's 100th birthday. The Duke of Edinburgh rose, a gift from the Royal Horticultural Society, has already been planted in the gardens at Windsor Castle, and sales of it will benefit the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme. Now, the Euros finally get underway on Friday, a whole year late because of the pandemic, with Wales and England playing at the weekend and Scotland in action on Monday. The month-long tournament will see 24 teams take part in 51 games in 11 cities across Europe. Our sports editor, Dan Roan, reports.
It's a tournament that's given football some of its most unforgettable moments.
Oh, I say, what a goal!
The Euros may have been delayed by a year, but finally they're about to begin. And one man who scored in 2 consecutive European Championships can't wait.
We all look forward to a summer of a major tournament. And this, we've been made to wait quite a while for this one, so we're all excited.
24 teams will compete for European football's greatest prize. Wales are in Group A, while England and Scotland are grouped together and will meet next week. For the first time, the tournament's been spread across the continent with 11 host cities. Wembley will host 8 matches, including the semi-final and final. But COVID remains the #1 concern. Preparations for Spain's opener against Sweden already in chaos, with players from both teams testing positive and forced to isolate.
The biggest concern for me is that we do not have a team which needs to go on quarantine. We had always some challenges in each of the Euros, but this time the biggest challenge was that we could not really control the pandemic.
Is there any risk this could become a super spreader event?
In our view, not. We are confident what we have put in place.
For supporters, venues have different capacities and a range of rules. At Hampden Park in Glasgow, ticket holders will simply be asked to maintain social distancing of 1.5 metres. But here at Wembley, the 22,000 attending each group game will need to show proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test.
With thousands of fans attending matches at grounds like Wembley over the coming weeks, organisers will hope that the Euros proves a morale-boosting symbol of hope and a return to some kind of normality. But they'll also begin amid uncertainty around the impact the pandemic could still have on this tournament and the potential for division.
And there's the taking of the knee.
The FA desperate that there's no repeat of the booing that's marred recent matches when England continue their anti-racism gesture.
I think it's incredibly disappointing. Well, we're really clear on our position, Dan. We are 100% behind the players, and we believe that once fans really understand it's not a political gesture, there is absolutely no reason for them to boo. They should respect the players and they should get behind their team in the Euros.
And with some of the game's greatest stars on show, many now hope the tournament's remembered for its football and not the unprecedented challenges it undoubtedly faces. Dan Roan, BBC News.
And that's it from us. Good night.